Hi, this is Manjula Narayan, books editor, Hindustan Times, and I have with me today Chinmay Tumbe, who's written this very interesting book, India Moving, A History of Migration. Now, as we all know, I mean, like we've all had, within our families, we've moved around the country, we've moved abroad and come back, or, like ethnically, we've grown up in places, we've grown up in places where we don't belong ethnically, and that's increasingly the story with a lot of Indians. So, Chima, how did you come to write this book?
Yeah, I just thought, as you said, it is such a obvious and such a fascinating phenomenon, and we all have friends and family who either now have intermarried or they've belonged to so many different cultures that a general history of migration had never been written. Was something deeply upsetting for a guy who, as an academic, works on migration. And so this book is to get these fascinating stories in one coherent place. And it's unique because it looks at both internal and international migration, and it looks at both voluntary and involuntary. So you won't get a book on partition and dam displacement, as well as UP migration and slavery and a variety of movements in one book. And I think that's what I'm trying to do out here, writing it in a non-academic way to make it more readable for a general audience.
Yes, it's very readable, and I found that one could relate. Like I was telling you, from your own family history, you realize that you are part of a movement. That's what the book helps the reader understand. But like you were saying, these hubs, UP, Punjab, Bengal, Kerala, these have traditionally been places that sent out a lot of migrants internationally as well as within the country. Why do you think that is?
I think these particular clusters, what I call the coastal clusters and the Gangetic clusters, the common denominator across them, Bihar is the poorest state of India, Kerala is the richest, but the connecting factor is density. How many people are there on a particular square kilometer? And what explains density is a combination of rainfall, combination of why certain populations were not wiped out during wars, and stuff like that. So that has a much deeper history. But the two key factors out here, one is the recruitment for military, and you'll see that many of these districts have been historically providing soldiers for centuries, especially in Bihar. From Sher Shah Suri to the British Army, they've been providing. So they've had very long traditions of migration. And one of the things I discovered while doing research is that many of these pockets, even in the Konkan region, guys used to work in the Shivaji's army, then the Bombay police, and then the textile mills. So they have a very deep tradition of migration. And the common denominator in all is sort of links with military sort of circuits, military moving circuits, and international trade. And that explains the migration of business communities and how they went around the world as well.
So that's Gujarat and Kerala would be explained like that, I suppose.
Yeah, the business part is mainly the northwest, Gujarat, Rajasthan for the Marwadis and so on. But otherwise, I would say it's a combination of rainfall, that is, having access to water allows the population to grow. But beyond a point, there's only that much agriculture can support. So then there's a pressure, for example, for people to leave that place. So the 19th century, for example, Bihar was one of the densest places in the world.
Yes.
So with a given square kilometer or acre of land, there's not much you can do to feed your family. So you have to go out. And this sort of pressure to move comes after a tipping point in population thresholds. So around the world, you'll see dense places have much more pressure for people to move out.
Okay. So the same explanation for, the beginning of colonialism and for this.
Yeah. What colonialism did was it got new destinations. So without the colonialist, Indians would not have reached Mauritius, Fiji and South Africa and Malaysia. But one of the things I'm trying to say in this book is, we often think that there's a word indentured labor. All these guys went on indentured contracts, and it was very exploitative. But my reading of this history is that most people went on their own choice, and when they abolished indenture, the migrations didn't stop. They continued to move. So there was something much more. What the British gave was a destination, but the pressure to move was always there. And that's why even today they're still moving.
And you mentioned that this is the longest, non-coerced movement of labor in history, anywhere, like in world history.
Absolutely.
Indians moving.
Absolutely, because what I call the Great Indian Migration Wave, I call it the largest and longest non-coerced, work-related migration history. examples of similar examples are the slave trade, between Europe, Africa,
but that's
and
coerced.
America. But that was very coerced. Even the age of mass migration, between Europe and US from 1880 to 1940, that was massive, but a short period of time. Whereas the Konkan belt or the Bihar Eastern UP belt, we're talking of mass migration for almost 150 years.
Yeah, it's still going on.
So this is like a Guinness Book of World Record kind of a migration. And what's interesting is some of these places have prospered tremendously because of migration.
Yes.
And some of them have not. Right? And I argue that some of the reasons for this are in underlying governance, education, how the money from migration has been used. That is important.
That's why there's differences between states like Bihar and Kerala.
Absolutely. So both Kerala and Bihar are sending migrants out, but Kerala arguably has got much more benefits from the migration.
Yes.
They've sort of leveraged that benefit much more than what Bihar has been able to.
And going forward, where do you think, Indians, like you mentioned in the book that within India, migration is going to be from north to the south.
Correct.
Because of increased prosperity of the south. So talk about that.
So the Great Indian Migration Wave earlier was eastbound towards, Burma, Sri Lanka, Malaysia.
Yes.
Then it became westbound, that's the Gulf, and Bombay, Surat, this corridor. And what I argue is now it's going to go south. So, this whole corridor is going to move south because of these big differences in development. So that's one big change you'll see, and you already see it in many states. North Indians. I was in a coffee plantation in Tamil Nadu, and Bihari migrants speaking fluent Tamil, or they picked up because the wage difference is so high. Earlier it was not enough to induce you to move to a new place, learn the language, because that's a cost, moving cost. But now that's not there anymore, because there's so much more to gain if you learn the language. So that's one. As I was telling you, Africa is a potential new destination for migrants from India. For out migration. Even within India, earlier the Keralites were going to Gulf. Today there are more people going from Bihar and UP to the Gulf than from Kerala. And so this switch has happened just in the last few years, just about 2-3 years.
So you're saying the new destinations will be in Africa?
The same sources will have different destinations. There will also be some new sources, especially in central India, which has historically been outside the mass migration circuits. Slowly you're seeing districts which are seeing the first signs of mass migration, which is very short duration. And over time you'll see these same districts, join the gang of Kerala or Bihar over time. When will this end? When will it end for some of these regions? One thing that ends is fertility. So when fertility sort of goes very low, or fewer kids are being born in that area, then the pressure to move also will be, that much lower. So you'll see that.
That's a long way off, no?
But not for Kerala. Kerala is already hitting that sort of, the demographic transition is almost taken over. So another 20 years, that pressure will be much less. But the networks will still be there. So, that pull will always be there. The other thing I mentioned is, we did a field survey in the Konkan region.
Yes, Ratnagiri.
Ratnagiri. And historically, the upper castes have had a much wider sort of spatial or migrant network. And what you'll see in the coming years, or what we documented in Ratnagiri, is a catch-up of migration rates from the lower caste are catching up to the migration rates of the upper caste. So now everyone in India is pretty much moving. And to me, and I argue that that's a good thing. And one of the things I'm arguing in the book is that you need to have more people across, different community backgrounds, castes, to move and sort of get the benefits of migration. Because when you have a migrant network, it gets you jobs, it gets you information, it gets you a variety of things which you don't have if you're stuck into one small place. Because in today's world, everything depends on networks. So a migrant network helps a lot if you belong to that network.
But in Maharashtra, traditionally, I mean, everybody, like you mentioned in the book, everyone from Tilak to Ambedkar to Thackeray were all, migrant, a result of the migrant networks, right?
Yeah.
So
Thackeray himself was born in Pune, and he moved to Mumbai. But what's interesting between Thackeray and Ambedkar is that they have very different views on migration.
Yes.
And so Ambedkar, because he always looked at migration as a positive thing, because he himself came out of his, he got a lot of dignity with migration. Whereas in Thackeray's view, it was very different. He looked at migration from a nativist point of view.
Yeah.
So in this book, I look at these two characters as, poles apart on the
cosmopolitanism and nativism.
Absolutely.
So talk about that.
Yeah, I think if you look around the world today, there's this backlash against globalization, but above all immigration. So if you see in the US, Europe, what's happening, even in India versus Bangladeshi migrants and so on, historically this happened earlier. This is not the first time it's happened. It happened 100 years earlier. And at that time, they became very racist. You know, the Indians were blocked out in the US and Canada.
Yes,
precisely because, you know, they were the racist sort of immigration laws which are put in place. And you see a turn towards that again. And what I argue in the book is that, you know, that's just wrong. And migration in general is a good thing. Most of us are migrants or descendants of some. And so I argue that cosmopolitanism is good. And one of the reasons the book is written is to give the story of migration, how it has helped, and to bolster the case for cosmopolitanism and not nativism. And I think this is a very defining ideological battle which will play out in this century. Because people are always scared that others will overrun us.
Yes.
But if you look at the numbers, they never really cause a demographic upheaval. Whether it's Mexican, and what's amazing is a lot of this migration is circular. So people are also going back. You know, from most Mexicans who've gone to US have actually gone back. That's a story which has never been told. So once you make your money, even from Kerala to Gulf, people are coming back. In that case, you can't settle in the Gulf.
Settle there.
So that's you know, one option. But even Bangladeshi migrants, you'd be surprised to know how many Bangladeshi migrants actually go back.
Yes.
A lot of them is in the agricultural sector along the border. So this is what I call the debate or the battle, 21st century battle between cosmopolitanism and nativism. The last century was all about economic ideology, about, you know, communism and capitalism and so on. Whereas now I think it's a lot of it is going to be on migration.
Okay. Okay, and you, like you were telling me, it's really interesting about, you know, migration into India by non-Indians, you know, both of African origin and of European, white Europeans.
Absolutely. You see that a lot in student migration. You see that a lot of the high-end, high-tech sort of expat, so-called expat migration. And I think these numbers will pick up. So and this will be a big difference between India and China, which I think people are not caught on to, is that India will be hopefully much more welcoming to immigrants as we sort of grow.
If we overcome our racism.
I think it will come to a point where racism will have to sort of subside precisely in order to accommodate more people. I think at one level we have a notion that we have too many people.
Yes,
so why should we have more people?
Yeah.
But you'll see that with economic growth, there'll be new sectors open up with new skill demands, which many times are not being done by the locals. You might, and that's why we have so many Nepali, you know, in the Konkan region or even in Kerala. Once migrants have gone out and done well, they are not going to do the sort of menial jobs now.
Yes.
So who's going to do that? And so in India, we've got, you know, Nepali migrants and relatively poorer migrants again coming in to do that work. So India is a very fascinating place because we have internal migration, we have emigration, and we have a lot of immigration as well. In fact, India is a country of net immigration, which is a, you know, remarkable stat.
So you think more people are going to come in as well? Like,
a lot of people will come in, yeah.
Population
the other risk is climate change, you know, and Bangladesh being a low-lying area, as sea levels rise, that's a major sort of scenario which India has to be aware of. As I mentioned, you know, after the 71 refugee crisis, not many people thought that, you know, the Bangladesh migration will resume again. It used to happen from the past, but then 20-year interlude, and then it started again. And similarly with climate change, you'll see a lot of migration pressure to build up. So that's a scenario one has to be, one has to sort of keep in mind going forward.
Okay, great. So it's really fascinating, and I mean, I'm enjoying reading the book, and I think everybody should, go out and buy this book because it kind of gives you an idea, it gives you a perspective, like a bird's eye view on what we are and what we could become, and how that's a good thing if it's leading towards cosmopolitanism, because in every state of India, there's this, especially the more prosperous states, Maharashtra, not Gujarat maybe, but Kerala, these places which are seeing influxes, there is a growing resentment. I mean, Maharashtra, we've seen it.
Yeah.
Like, that's what the Shiv Sena was about originally. But other places also, it's coming up. So how to combat that? Perhaps, your book will give us ideas as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks a lot.